Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this video, we're going to be doing a deep dive of the new rocket cart. This is a Mangonel line replacement for Chinese and Koreans, as well as the upcoming Jurchens and Khitans in the Three Kingdoms DLC coming out next month. Each of those civilizations has a slightly different flavor rocket cart due to a combination of bonuses and unique techs, and we'll talk about those as they come up. But the main goal here is to overview the unit, take a bit of a look at what's going on behind the scenes, and help to build your intuition about how it's going to perform compared to the more familiar Mangonel line. To start, these are far from a reskin, and in fact most details about the units don't line up one-to-one, starting with their cost, which roughly swaps the regular wood and gold of a Mangonel. Both still come in at just under 300 resources each, with the rocket cart leaning a bit more heavily on gold. Note the Korean wood discount bonus doesn't apply to siege units, so this is the only price you'll ever train them at. Taking a look at their stats, the rocket cart has 5 less HP, its minimum range is 2.5 tiles instead of 3, and says it reloads half a second faster, though that's offset by the fact its firing animation takes longer, so practically speaking, their fire rate is almost indistinguishable. The training time for the rocket cart is then slightly faster, but between their cost and relatively minor stat differences, it doesn't immediately feel like one is strictly better than the other. By far the most glaring contrast, though, is their attack. Notice the rocket cart has 5 attack with 7 extra projectiles, so 8 in total, while the Mangonel has 40 attack with 6 total projectiles. Clearly they're doing things very differently here. Mangonels actually deal 40 melee attack with a 1-tile blast radius, and the further you are from the center of impact, the more that damage tapers off, while adding in 5 extra 1 damage projectiles, which are mostly cosmetic. That said, I don't want to completely write off those 1 damage projectiles, as we just recently saw the monk gaining 1 resistance to Mangonel damage specifically because those extra projectiles give a chance of one-shotting a monk with Sanctity if they all landed, so sometimes they do matter, but are just very secondary to the main projectile. This is the new Roman Catholic monk, by the way, looking pretty dapper. In contrast to this, the rocket cart fires 8 projectiles that all deal 5 damage and ignore armor, while also having some of that area damage effect. Each rocket has its own slight variability in where they'll land, then dealing less damage to units up to a tile away from the impact location. The result is both units in Castle Age end up with about 40 damage on a direct shot with a very similar damage area. That said, against high melee armor units, the Mangonel is impacted by that armor, while the rocket cart completely ignores it. In this case, with an identical starting position of units copy and pasted, aiming at the center, the rocket cart did about 10% more damage overall if we add up all the damage to all the units. That's largely due to the swordsman's 1 melee armor, but the random variability of where the arrows land also seems to give the rocket cart a tiny bit larger damage radius in practice. Now 10% more damage is probably not noticeable, but over a period of time against pikemen or crossbows, you'll notice they tend to clean up a group slightly faster. Of course, keep in mind, rocket carts survive 5 fewer shots in return with 45 instead of 50 arrows, so it leans a bit more toward a glass cannon situation against crossbows and skirmishers. Where the difference in their attack becomes much more obvious though is with high melee armor units like Boyars or Teutonic Knights, where we see not just 40 damage from the rocket cart versus the Mangonel's 35 to the center unit after melee armor comes into play, but then roughly a third more damage overall against these Teutonic Knights when we add everything up. This is obviously a more extreme case of melee armor in Castle Age, but it's starting to get to the point you could notice the difference. Overall though, we'll say rocket carts are situationally harder hitting against units, but another layer of complexity is that the two then have wildly different bonus damage values, partly because the bonuses have to apply to every rocket compared to only the Mangonel's main shot. For that reason, it's probably more fair to multiply the rocket cart's bonuses by 8 to look at the total bonus damage per volley. Immediately, a few things jump out, with the rocket cart having an extra bonus against castles and walls, not losing 1 damage against monks, and having far more bonus damage against buildings, though the fact these bonuses apply to every arrow makes them a bit misleading in some cases. For example, despite both dealing 40 extra bonus damage to the heavy siege class, which includes Hussite wagons and ballista elephants, Mangonels deal almost twice as much damage per shot to the elephant. The reason is that unit blocks the first 20 of that type of damage, fully negating the smaller individual numbers from the rocket cart, though against Hussite wagons, the two perform the same as we would have expected. In most cases though, the two perform interchangeably against siege, taking the same number of shots against most, and rocket carts and Mangonels both take out each other in 1 direct shot. Where things get really messy though is with buildings. To put this into context, we have a Scorpion dealing 85 damage per minute to an unupgraded house, A Mangonel improves on that to 869, and the rocket cart initially appears to do even better at 968, which is about 11% more than a Mangonel and roughly half the damage over time of a battering ram. One big exception is town centers, where Mangonels do about a third more damage, though either one has the range to at least pressure those. Against your typical enemy building though, things look pretty good for rocket carts. That is, until your opponent researches masonry. That technology cuts the damage of scorpions by nearly 80%, but only drops the damage of mangonels and rams by 8 and 3% respectively, as the tiny bit of extra building armor doesn't really matter to their high damage attacks. A lot of the rocket cart's damage is from little bonuses on all of their rockets though, which are all reduced by masonry, cutting their damage against buildings by more than half. Even all of that wall and anti-castle bonus damage we saw, which suggested they'd be great against those, is pretty misleading, as actually testing them against those things, the rocket cart does 11 and 13% less damage overall compared to mangonels. Now masonry has no effect on these buildings, but personally I actually kind of like this weakness for rocket carts, as there's something intuitive about buildings being made out of stone or masonry, referring to stonework, which is more susceptible to mangonel rocks than wooden rocket bolts, and that kind of feels right. All those things together mean that while the two are quite similar in many ways, they diverge in a few cases, where the rocket cart has some definite advantages against units, particularly high melee armor ones, which it just totally ignores, while the mangonel is more reliably anti-building. I want to say that all feels intuitive, but I'm not 100% sure why armor protects units from rocks, but not rocket bolts, though the building part makes sense at least. Now though, let's talk about what happens in the Imperial Age. To start with the rocket cart, for 800 food and 750 gold, you can upgrade it to its heavy version, going from 8 to 10 projectiles, 20 more HP, 2 more pierce armor, an important +1 range, and a 25% larger blast area. While it looks like the reload time is also shortening, that's actually just to make up for the greater number of projectiles taking a bit longer to fire. On the other hand, for a similar total amount of resources, the Onager upgrade gives a similar 50 blast attack and area increase, with a slightly lower HP and pierce armor boost. Of course, some civilizations then have the Siege Onager, which appears to have the edge in attack and blast area. At a glance, the heavy rocket cart feels like an Onager plus, but not on the same level as Siege Onager. Like Onagers, the heavy rocket cart can also of course destroy trees. Of course, while the heavy rocket cart itself may initially appear to be similar in strength to an Onager and lack a third tier upgrade, some unique techs can basically play that role. So let's look at what each civilization offers. To start with the Koreans, they have a unique tech on the same scale as a Siege Onager upgrade, which gives heavy rocket carts +1 range and 6 extra projectiles, bringing them from 10 to a maximum of 16. That's 80 unblockable damage, very comparable to the Siege Onager's 75, plus up to 9 extra from those secondary hits. Chinese then have rocketry, which gives rocket carts plus 25% damage, bringing them up from 50 into the low 60 range of damage on a direct hit. Jurchens are then the gunpowder focused of the new civs, getting the heavy upgrade at a 600 wood discount and deal half the friendly fire damage among other small bonuses. They also have a unique tech called Thunderclap Bombs, which gives a delayed explosion after every shot, and we'll see how this all compares in terms of total damage in a moment. Rounding things out are Khitans, which are basically generic, giving you something with similar firepower to an Onager, whereas the other three start to feel almost like Siege Onager territory, at least on paper. Now, I don't want to gloss over the fact that these unique techs range from 1500 to 1900 resources, which is less than the 2450 of Siege Onager, but are not cheap by any means. I should also note that all of these except Chinese get Siege Engineers, meaning Chinese miss out on that important +1 range, while Koreans still outrange fully upgraded Onagers by 1. Admittedly, this is all a lot to take in, so to put it in some context, firing against a group of Arbalesters, the least damage out of all of these is the Onager, followed by the generic Khitan heavy rocket carts with about 7% more damage. Chinese are next, at a little more than that, and Koreans follow with almost 50% more damage than a generic Onager, beat out ever so slightly by the Jurchens with their secondary explosion, and almost exactly matching a Siege Onager. Saracen Siege Onagers technically win out here at 427 damage after their unique tech counterweights, which is what you're seeing on screen. A hierarchy clearly seems to be forming, though let's be real, there's a lot of overkill going on which may be compressing the results. If we do it again against Paladins, it's actually a pretty similar list, with Onagers and Khitans neck and neck at the bottom, Chinese a jump up from that, Koreans in this case another big jump up from that, nearly on par with Siege Onagers, and Jurchens taking another leap thanks to the secondary explosions, almost matching a Saracen Siege Onager hit. Saracen siege onagers are of course the most expensive to upgrade here as well, so their top spot shouldn't be totally surprising. Clearly, Korean and Jurchen heavy rocket carts are the ones to watch out for though, with Khitans being basically an onager in practice, and Chinese hitting slightly harder but having shorter range. Outside of basic land units, the heavy rocket cart and onager aren't dramatically different against most siege or even each other head to head. The one exception is bombard cannons, where the higher HP of the heavy rocket cart lets it tank the first shot, while an onager can't. Most of what was noted earlier about buildings holds up in the Imperial Age as well. Before Masonry, Korean and Jurchen heavy rocket carts are complete juggernauts, dealing roughly 250 damage per shot, compared to a siege onager's 154, and the onager lagging way behind at 109. As we add in Masonry though, the onager line's attack is basically unchanged, while the heavy rocket cart's collective attack drops by a quarter or third in Imperial. Adding an architecture then brings them all to about the same level as an onager, with the siege onager suddenly being the standout, only being reduced by about 5% from those two techs, and the importance of those is maybe the biggest takeaway in the video. If you want to see that relationship in graph form, the difference is pretty stark, with the onager and siege onager being essentially unaffected by those upgrades, and the rocket carts, particularly Jurchens and their secondary explosions, dropping precipitously with each upgrade. As for how to work rocket carts into your armies, your intuition and experience with onagers is really your best guide. A pairing with Fire Lancers works really well in theory, having the anti-archer and infantry support with an anti-cavalry meat shield, though both of these units cost wood and gold, so that's an expensive way to do it. A Halberd rocket cart pairing also seems great as well, and as focused as we've been on these subtle differences from the onager line, the similarities between the rocket cart and onager far outweigh their differences. That'll do it for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.